In this video, we are going to discuss genetic combinations and monohybrid crosses. So, what determines what you look like? DNA stores information to make proteins, which then determine your traits. So what is a trait? A trait is a characteristic that is determined by your DNA. Examples of traits are eye color, hair color, skin color. It can be the ability to roll your tongue, or if you have a hitchhiker's thumb or a straight thumb. It can be fur color or size of a plant, whether it's tall or short, or seed color or flower color. These are all examples of traits. Traits are passed from parents to offspring through their gametes. You'll remember that gametes are made through the process of meiosis. Remember, mitosis happens in mitosis. Meiosis is what makes sex cells. Gametes contain half of the genetic information from each parent. This is why you have to get a sperm from your father and an egg from your mother to create a fertilized egg or embryo, which then turns into a human. Each one contains 23 chromosomes to create a total of 46 chromosomes to make a human. Keep in mind that gametes contribute to genetic diversity because all of the eggs in a female are not identical. All of the sperm in that same male are not identical either. So then when they're combined, we have endless possibilities. Genetics is the study of genes, genetic variation, heredity, which focuses on how traits are passed down from parents to offspring, and how that all interacts. An allele is one of two or more versions of a gene represented by a letter. For example, the eye color is a trait. There are several versions of eye color. We're going to just simplify it, and capital B is going to represent any color other than blue. So in this case, let's make that brown. And lowercase b is going to represent the allele, which is the version of the trait that codes for blue eyes. So again, to reiterate, you got half of your DNA, your genes or alleles, from your mother in the egg, and half of your genes or alleles from your father in the sperm that combined through the process of fertilization to create an embryo with the full set of alleles, half from mom, half from dad. So we're going to continue with our example using eye color. Now keep in mind that eye color is much more complex than just what we're going to show. There are many different colors of eye, and also it's coded for on several different genes. We're going to look at just one little combination and simplify it a little bit for you. Alleles can be either dominant or recessive. Dominant alleles are represented by a capital letter and are always expressed when present. You can think about dominant alleles as dominating over the recessive version of the gene. In our example, brown eyes are dominant over blue eyes, so we will represent the dominant allele using a capital B. Recessive alleles are represented by a lowercase letter and are not expressed when a dominant version of the gene is present. Recessive versions of the trait are only expressed when both alleles are recessive. In our example, blue eyes are the recessive version of the trait, so we will use a lowercase b to represent blue eyes. The trait for the recessive allele may not be expressed in the organism, but still can be passed down to its offspring. Think about if someone is a carrier of a genetic disorder. They may not be symptomatic, but they can still be a carrier and pass it down to their offspring. Again, the memory trick for remembering the difference between dominant and recessive alleles is dominant alleles always dominate over the recessive gene. So if you want the recessive gene to be seen, you must have both alleles recessive. The genotype of an organism is the genetic makeup for that trait. It's represented by letters. So, for example, eye color would be capital B to represent brown eyes because brown eyes are the dominant version of that trait. Lowercase b would be the genotype for blue eyes. And phenotype is that physical representation of the trait, the eye color. A memory trick to help you to remember the difference between genotype and phenotype is to think about the starting letters. Genotype and genetic both start with GEN, and phenotype and physical both start with PH, even though they sound like they start with an F. 3 possible combinations of the alleles to make genotypes are homozygous dominant, heterozygous, and homozygous recessive. Homozygous is when there are 2 identical alleles for the trait. They can be either both dominant or both recessive. A little hint to help you to remember the word homozygous means that they're identical alleles is that homo means same. So homozygous means that it has the same version of the alleles, either both dominant or both recessive. You may see this term referred to as purebred, which makes sense because a purebred dog is all that one breed. It's not a mixture of multiple breeds. Heterozygous is when you have 2 different versions of the alleles, both dominant and recessive. In a heterozygous genotype, the dominant trait is expressed because it's stronger. Keep in mind that hetero means different. You may see this also referred to as hybrid. You can think about a hybrid car. It uses both gas and electricity as the form of energy to fuel the car's movement. Some examples of heterozygous genotypes are capital B, lowercase b, capital T, lowercase t, and capital R, lowercase r. They both have the dominant and recessive version of the traits. Remember though, only the dominant version of the trait is actually expressed. Punnett squares are used to predict the outcome of genetic crosses. A simple monohybrid cross only predicts the outcome for parents for a specific trait. So remember, mono means 1. So we're only looking at 1 trait. A Punnett square has 4 boxes. The parents' genotypes are located on the left and top on the outside of the Punnett square. We separate the parents' alleles to represent all of the possible combinations of these alleles. Remember that parents only pass on half of their alleles in each gamete. So that's why we have a version of each of them here, and each box only receives 1 of those alleles from each parent. Each box should contain 2 alleles, 1 from the mother, 1 from the father, for monohybrid crosses. The possible offspring genotypes are located on the inside of the boxes. This is going to represent all of the possible combinations for the genotypes of those offspring. Think of the Punnett square as a crib, with the babies being inside of the crib, inside of the boxes, with the parents outside looking in. Each of the boxes of the Punnett square is worth 25%. There are 4 boxes, so think about $1. $1 broken into 4 parts is 25 cents, and a 25 cents is a quarter. So 1 box, 25%. So now let's look at how to use the Punnett square for this example. Remember, each baby gets 1 allele from the mother and 1 from the father. They're represented here by blue sperm and pink eggs. The blue sperm don't have anything to do with the eye color. They're just blue because blue for boy. In this first combination, we have the capital B, which is the dominant allele of this trait from the mother in the egg, and the capital B from the father in this version of the sperm. It can donate either the capital B or the lowercase b. This box represents alleles from this row and this column. Let's separate them and just fill it in. The genotype for this offspring is homozygous dominant because both alleles are dominant. The eye color for this allele, the phenotype, is going to be brown. You get to see my great drawing skills. This box represents the combination of the alleles from this row and this column. This offspring has a heterozygous genotype, 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele. So think about which one is stronger. The dominant allele is going to dominate over the recessive allele, resulting in a phenotype that is dominant. So this organism will have brown eyes. In this box, we run into an issue here. Think about your name. You always write the first letter of your name capital with the rest of the letters lowercase. So in this case, we always put the capital letters first to avoid confusion. So this allele is heterozygous, one dominant and one recessive allele. The phenotype of this organism will be brown eyes. Now for our last combination, we have a recessive allele from the father and a recessive allele from the mother to make a homozygous recessive genotype. Now this organism does not have any dominant alleles, so it will have a blue eye phenotype. So again, the whole purpose of this is to identify or predict the possible outcomes and the probability for each genotype and phenotype for a specific crossing. All right, so now we're going to do a little simple math with ratios. The genotypic ratio refers to the genotypes. We have our homozygous dominant that is always located first, followed by heterozygous, followed by homozygous recessive. In this example, only one of the offspring combinations is homozygous dominant. So we put a 1 here. There are 2 offspring combinations that are heterozygous and 1 that is homozygous recessive. So let's look at what these numbers actually mean. They should always add up to 4 in a monohybrid cross. We have 1 plus 2 plus 1 to equal 4 because we have 4 possible combinations. The 1, remember, is 1 box, 25%. So that means that the offspring has a 25% chance of being homozygous dominant. The offspring has a 50% chance, because 25 plus 25 is 50, of being heterozygous, and a 25% probability of being homozygous recessive. The phenotypic ratio of monohybrid crosses should also add up to 4. This represents the number of possible genetic combinations that will result in the dominant representation of the trait and the recessive representation of the trait. So we have 1, 2, 3 brown-eyed offspring possibilities and only 1 recessive or blue-eyed offspring. What this means is there is a 75% chance of the offspring having brown eyes and only a 25% chance of the offspring having blue eyes. Let's go ahead and do another example. In this example, we're going to use pea plants. They can be either tall or short as their phenotype. In this case, the first thing that I want you to do anytime that you have a monohybrid cross is to break it into steps. Step 1, identify the alleles. What do the letters actually represent? When you write them down, it makes it much more clear. So here I've already done that. Capital T represents the tall phenotype. Lowercase t represents the short phenotype. Now let's look at a plant that is homozygous dominant for tall. This plant is going to donate the pollen to the other plant. So the other plant we'll call the female plant, even though it's not. And the female plant will donate the egg. So the egg is going to be homozygous recessive, which results in a short phenotype. When you're doing practice problems like this, they won't always provide a Punnett square. Actually, most likely not. So when you're drawing a Punnett square, start off with just a regular square. Add one line up the center. And another line across. Maybe yours will be straight. All right, then we put our parents on the outside. Remember, they're looking in at their offspring. Okay, so it's important for you to remember that it doesn't really matter which side you put the parents on, but you have to keep their alleles together. When I look at the left side, I can find the full genotype of one parent, and at the top, I find the full genotype of the other parent. We separate them just because they're only going to give one to the offspring. All right, so for the offspring, let's use red. This first box is a combination of this allele from the pollen and this allele from the egg, resulting in a heterozygous offspring. The offspring will be tall because it has the dominant gene, which dominates over the recessive gene. The next offspring receives the recessive allele from the egg and the dominant allele from the pollen, resulting in a heterozygous offspring. This offspring is also tall. In this next one, capital T, lowercase t, with a heterozygous genotype and tall phenotype. Last one, representing a heterozygous genotype and tall phenotype. Anytime you cross a parent that is homozygous dominant with a homozygous recessive parent, it's going to create all heterozygous offspring. So the genotype ratio is pretty easy. We have 0 homozygous dominant, 4 heterozygous offspring, and 0 homozygous recessive. There is a 100% chance that the offspring will be heterozygous. Now for the phenotype, all of them are tall. Tall is the dominant version of the trait. So we have 4 tall, 0 short, which means there's a 100% chance or 100% probability that the offspring will be tall. And it's that simple. Please make sure to watch the companion video about other patterns of genetic inheritance so that you can get the rest of the story on genetics. There are also plenty of practice problems in your resource folder. The more you practice, the better you're going to get.